So the final 53-man roster cuts are just around the corner, particularly on Tuesday the 26th. However, the Philadelphia Eagles have made a trade for a backup quarterback in Sam Howell from the Minnesota Vikings. A move that may throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in terms of how they decide to build this roster. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Listen, it's just Sam Howell. He's not going to start. So why the hell could this be a shakeup in the roster? Well, now you have to allocate a roster spot for a guy you just traded assets for. And you have to take a spot away from somebody else. Whether that's a Kyle McCord, whether that's some other position group, that's where the roster shakeup starts to happen. If you have 3 quarterbacks on your roster and you add another quarterback to the fray, you have to take a position spot away from either a wide receiver, other positions on the field. And we'll talk about the 53-man roster in a little bit, but let's just break down the trade just a little bit more because the trade just happened recently. And here, the Eagles find their Tanner McKee injury solution. So the reason they made this trade is because Tanner McKee actually injured his finger during practice. But here's the breakdown of the trade. Minnesota gets a 2026 5th-round pick and a 2027 7th-round pick. And Philadelphia gets a 6th-round pick in 2026 and Sam Howell, while Tanner McKee deals with an injury. And again, I'm not opposed to the move by any means because, quite frankly, as much as we like the quarterbacks on the roster, and I think Kyle McCord isn't terrible, he's certainly a guy who belongs in the NFL as just a quarterback on the roster. He was, after all, a 6th-round pick from Syracuse, and we talked about this in a draft breakdown when we got him. He's a guy that tends to stare down receivers. Now, he can really throw the ball, and he's really, really, smart, but he just stares down receivers. Let me lower down this menu here. And in the NFL, if you start staring down receivers and staring down where you're going to throw the ball, it leads to usually either incompletions or bigger problems down the line. And we saw in the preseason games, in the few times he was out there, a guy who certainly belongs on the team, but a guy who's not necessarily going to be seeing the field anytime soon unless catastrophe happens in Philadelphia. And knock on wood. Oh, good Lord. That was really, really, I don't know if you heard that, but that was really, really hollow, knocking on my head. So we're going to just dismiss that. But the point being is, not knock on wood, we hope catastrophe doesn't happen at the quarterback position where Kyle McCord has to actually see the field. But since week 1 is right around the corner and Tanner McKee injured the finger, it seems to be Philadelphia is thinking, hey, this guy may not be ready for week 1. He may not be ready for the next couple of weeks for a little bit more of a longer-term issue, and we need a guy who we could trust where the drop-off isn't so substantial from Jalen Hurts to the backup. Obviously, there's going to be a drop-off, but having a veteran back there as opposed to Kyle McCord, I think Philadelphia feels better about that versus Kyle McCord being the 2nd-string guy if Tanner McKee is not able to go during week 1. So, yeah, that's the trade breakdown. And how does this affect the 53-man roster? I talked about it before. It may just affect another position group down the line on the roster. And that is a unique and precarious situation for Philadelphia because there's a lot of guys on the roster who are fighting for their lives to secure a roster spot. And we have guys who are on the injured reserve list. We have guys who are on the PUP list. But there's a couple of position groups I think that I'm going to key in on that actually might be affected with a trade acquisition of Sam Howell. But before we do that, I got to introduce you to the show because this is the Riding the Bench Eagles podcast. I am your host, Asif Badi, and like you, I am a Birds fan and talks about the Birds, only the Birds, and nothing but the Philadelphia Eagles. So please do us a favor here. Help us grow this channel organically by shooting this video a thumbs up, commenting your thoughts in the comment section below, and subscribing to the channel because in the end, it doesn't cost you a damn thing to subscribe. Also, check us out on audio platforms such as Apple Podcasts and Spotify because we don't only do this for the video audience, we do this for the audio platform. So help a brother out, help us grow. We appreciate your support on the opposite side of the camera, on the opposite side of the airwaves. So let's talk about this 53-man roster, ladies and gentlemen. And there's an article out there on NBC Philadelphia that has a projection of the roster. And again, this is the latest one that I found. So that's what I'm going to use as my basis for the argument here, or the basis for the topic of discussion. I'm going to pull up the article right now. So Philadelphia is going to be carrying 3 quarterbacks on the roster in Jalen Hurts, Tanner McKee, and Kyle McCord. Now, having a guy like Sam Howell on the roster all of a sudden throws a little bit of a monkey wrench in that. Well, maybe Kyle McCord goes to the practice squad and Sam Howell becomes a guy that stays on the roster there. However, if a team is in desperate need of a quarterback, is it possible that they may go after a guy like Kyle McCord on the practice squad? Who knows? I doubt it, but I think that's the gamble that Philadelphia is trying to figure out. And also, Howie Roseman drafted Kyle McCord. And if we know anything about Howie Roseman and what he likes to do with his draft picks, he usually does not like to send them to the practice squad unless it's absolutely necessary. And he believes that some team is not going to swipe them on the roster. So last year we did that with Anais Smith because he had such a terrible camp and he had such a terrible preseason. People were calling him Anus Smith. I wasn't going that far, but point being is he knew nobody was going to go out and sign him, so you were able to delegate him to the practice roster, right? So that's really, the deal with the quarterback situation. Running backs are pretty secure with Saquon, Will Shipley, A.J. Dillon, and Ben Van Sumeren, who's probably going to be playing fullback and even linebacker for us at times if we're in a pinch. So that's a valuable roster spot right there. Receivers are also pretty much set now that Johnny Wilson is on the IR. You have Devontae, AJ, you have Jahan Dotson, John Mechie, who we just acquired not too long ago. And then Darius Cooper is a preseason star who's been playing really, really well. Just looks like a guy who could play. And then, again, Anais Smith, Terrence Marshall, Avery Williams are going to be delegated to the practice squad. At least that's their projection. Now, I'm not 100% sure if we're going to be running around with 5 receivers on the roster. I think they really like Anais Smith, maybe as a return guy, especially because Avery Williams is going to be sent to the practice squad. I think they need to find someone who's going to be able to return kicks. Maybe it's Anais Smith. Maybe it's even Darius Cooper or Cooper DeJean. Who knows? But that's another key position that I think is pretty much set. Here's one that I think is a little bit of a question mark in tight end. Do you think Philadelphia is really going to carry 3 tight ends on the roster? I don't know. We are a run-heavy team, so that is part of the equation, and that may be a reason why you have an extra tight end. But again, having a third tight end here, especially a guy like Kyle Granson, who I like as a player, I don't know if he's going to be seeing a lot of playing time, number one. And number two, does he actually fit the style of offense that we have? Is he a good blocker for his size? Yes, he is. He's not a bad tight end by any means. Certainly a better blocker than Grant Calcaterra. But having a third tight end is going to affect a roster spot somewhere on the defense, which I think is going to be a little bit more problematic. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But offensive line's pretty much set. It's just a matter of whether or not who are the 10 offensive linemen that we keep, because I do have a feeling we're going to keep 10 guys in the offensive line room. We already know our top 5. That's pretty much set. Matt Pryor, a veteran in this league, a swing tackle, swing guard, like the guy can play all over the line. Kennard is somebody that they really, really like. Drew Kendall has been playing really, really well, so you're going to see him on the roster. And then Brett Toth, another veteran, and then Miles Hinton. We'll see how he looks going down the line, but that's probably going to be the outlook of the roster here. Trevor Keegan, a guy that I like, is probably going to be delegated to the practice squad. Really hasn't had a really, really great camp or a great preseason by any means. And then defensive tackle, 6 guys. I think he carried like 7 last year, so that's pretty much normal. The edge room is pretty unique, where they have Patrick Johnson potentially being a guy that sticks around as a edge guy, And he is a guy that we have been constantly flipping around the roster. Last year, we sent him to the practice squad, and the Giants signed him. Now he's back in Philadelphia. So maybe, just maybe, they may try to keep him. I think they're going to try to keep a sixth edge rusher. I don't know if they're going to go with 5. I think they really like Powell Ryland, their 6th-round draft pick that they took late in the draft, guys. Howie Roseman loves to keep his draft picks. So if that's the case, I don't see why they would put into the practice squad, albeit he didn't have necessarily a spectacular preseason where he popped off your screen, but he did show them some things that I think they really like. And listen, this edge room, guys, if one of these guys goes down, if Nolan Smith, most likely, he already has injury concerns. If he goes down with injury, all of a sudden you're going to be relying on Jalex Hunt, Josh Uche, and Azeez Ojulari. Now, again, we like Jalex Hunt. I don't know if I'm comfortable relying on him to be the star edge guy on Philadelphia at the moment. That's a tough ask for a second-year player who's already a project. So they may just keep another guy as depth, and that might be the way they go. So they may have a 6th edge guy. So like I said, if you keep 3 tight ends, you have to keep 5 edge guys. If you keep 2 tight ends, you can have a 6th edge guy and open up a roster spot somewhere. So that's just something to keep in mind. Linebacker, there's 4 guys here. Now, I know you're looking for Nakobe Dean's name here, but he's on the pup list. And after a certain amount of time, the pup list turns into almost an injury report, and it doesn't count against your 53-man roster. So as long as you keep him out for 4 games minimum, he can remain quote unquote on the roster without affecting a roster spot. So that's a little bit of a trick of the trade, so to speak, that NFL teams use. So Nakobe Dean, while he is still on the roster right now, he's not necessarily going to count against the 53-man roster and ultimately saves a roster spot for a position of need. Cornerback is 6 guys in the room. You're going to have Jacorian Bennett, Keely Ringo, Adoree Jackson, Cooper DeJean, and Quinyon Mitchell. Obviously, an interesting guy that's out on the list, Eli Ricks. That might be a little bit of a crapshoot. I'm not sure what the pulse is on Eli Ricks in terms of NFL contention and NFL roster spots. I don't know if he gets to the roster squad or the practice squad, if teams are going to give him a shot, because quite frankly, he has made plays in preseason in the past, and we've seen him just have like good pedigree. He's come from Alabama. He's a solid player for a guy with his talent level. So will a team give him a shot? Maybe. So I don't know what we do with Eli Ricks. Safety, we got 4 guys here. And then obviously the specialist, Jake Elliott, Brandon Mann, and then Charlie Hewitt, probably a long snapper of some sort. Point being is, guys, I went down that roster. The question becomes, how are we going to allocate roster spots for this Philadelphia Eagles team? That remains to be the question. And with a trade for Sam Howell, does that change the math? Because if you decide as Philadelphia to say, I am not going to put Kyle McCord on the practice squad because we drafted the kid, you now have a roster spot on the roster that has to be yoinked. And yes, I did use yoinked as a term. But where are you going to make that sacrifice? Where on the roster are you going to decide, hey, I'm going to just take one guy off from here and put him somewhere else? It could be offensive line because you have 10 guys there. And are we really going to anticipate that, you know, a guy like Matt Pryor can't step in for a tackle spot, can't step in for the guard spot? I mean, we already had some injuries last season. We had guys like Fred Johnson and Tyler Steen step in for when Mekhi Becton and, you know, Jordan Mailata. Not that Jordan Mailata had injuries, which I'm sure he did, but you know, we've seen our backup linemen come in and play quality football for us. So that's something that's a little bit cause for concern. And I'm sure Philadelphia's thinking to themselves, hey, I'd rather have more offensive linemen than not. So maybe that's not the room that you look at. But again, where do we make the sacrifice? I think it's tight end. I don't think you carry 3 tight ends on the roster. I think Philadelphia decides to run out 2 tight ends with Dallas Goedert and Grant Calcaterra, and you have an extra spot for either a defensive back or an extra spot for a defensive lineman in the edge room. I think that's where they're going to go. Sam Howell, this throws a little bit of a monkey wrench in because if you don't put Kyle McCord on the practice squad, what do we do? Do we carry 4 quarterbacks on the roster? Might be a tough ask for them. But again, with Tanner McKee's injury, if he's not able to make the roster by week 1 in terms of being available, you have to ask yourself these questions all of a sudden. And Philadelphia, I don't know, in the past has done 4 quarterbacks on the roster. I doubt they will. I think last year they did 3. So that's the basis that we're all going off on. But if they do decide to carry 3, Kyle McCord may be the guy that goes to the practice squad. And then a matter of tight end and edge room becomes a question mark, whether or not you decide to take one guy off and add one guy in, or even offensive lineman where you decide to say, you know what, we'll take Miles Hinton, put him on the practice squad, and then we'll maybe have an open roster spot for cornerback, maybe an open roster spot for edge room. But that's my concern. That's what my takeaway is. This Howell trade, while it does seem to affect us in the short term in terms of availability for Tanner McKee, this may be a shakeup long term for us that could affect the 53-man roster in a way that is relatively interesting. So curious to see how Philadelphia is going to do later this week when they decide ultimately what their 53-man roster is going to look like. And we'll talk about that when the time comes on Tuesday. But for now, Sam Howell is a Philadelphia Eagle from the Minnesota Vikings. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below because I do think it's an interesting trade. And it does give a little insight into just how severe Tanner McKee's injury to his finger may be and what this roster will look like down the line could be truly affected by the acquisition of Sam Howell. Hey, thank you so much for watching the Riding the Bench Eagles podcast. If you want to continue to support the channel, please hit the like and subscribe button down below. Also, check us out on Instagram and TikTok at Riding the Bench Eagles Pod. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you name it, we're on there. Thank you so much for listening, and please join us next time here at the Riding the Bench Eagles Podcast.